What is going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome to the Week 14 Waiver Wire Show, where we are going to be covering everything that you need to know to start off Week 14 of fantasy football. Now, hopefully you have all had time to recover from your turkey and mashed tater comas, because if you have, you've noticed that the NFL is straight drunk on eggnog and has been for a long time. But if we're being honest, not a whole lot has made sense in the NFL since like week 1. But you better believe that's not going to stop us. So in today's show, once again, this is what we're going to be going through. We'll have our weekly rant session, the top injuries from week 13, best available players on the waiver wire, some waiver wire power rankings, starter stash, FAAB budget recommendations, and you better believe there'll be some Streamin Ds at the end. Now, there are timestamps to all these different sections down below in the description. And if you like that, do me a favor and hit the like button for me. Now, it's Monday morning, and you better believe I could use a pick-me-up. I need to get the juices flowing here just a little bit. So how about we try a little Monday night double up on Underdog? So this is what I'm gonna go ahead and do, and if you wanna follow along, by all means, I'm gonna go Jackson Dart over 19.5 rushing yards, Travion Henderson over 14.5 receiving yards, and Drake May over 209.5 passing yards. Now, if that hits, it's gonna a little bit more than double your money, but the deal gets better. And I have a cheat code, so now is the time to get on Underdog so you can come play along with us. Just head over to Underdog Fantasy or download the app, create a new account using the referral code Headliners when you do so. Then all you gotta do is make your minimum $10 deposit. But here is the cheat code. After you make that deposit, if you put just $5 on the ticket we just discussed, whether you win or lose, you'll get $100 in bonus funds added to your account automatically. So if this ticket hits, you'll have $115 in your account. Even if it misses, you'll still have $105 in your account. Then you'll have some free money to play along with us the last few weeks of the season. Then anything you win is money in your pocket. You get weeks of fun for just $10. I have spent $10 on worse things to have fun. It's a no-brainer. There's links down below in the description. But all right, we're switching things up here a little bit. Can I go ahead and fantasy football rant for all of us here for a second? Good. Taylor, cue the slow zoom and the dramatic music. Through 13 weeks of the 2025 season, I'm convinced we're all living in a simulation that forgot to install the patch notes. Nothing makes sense. Zero, zilch, nada. Up is down, left is right, and apparently your wide receiver 6, Adonai Mitchell, is now dropping 20, while your first round pick, Justin Jefferson, is out there scoring just one more point than that rusty folding chair you have in your garage. Every week, I open my app and say, surely the NFL calms down a little bit this week. Then the NFL comes out and says, hold my beer. We've got backup quarterbacks like Jacoby Brissett throwing for 300 yards weekly like he's out there playing Madden on rookie mode. The backup running backs that no one is starting, they're scoring touchdowns. Defenses are putting up 25 points one week and then forgetting how to tackle the next. Injuries? Yeah, we've had a ton of injuries. More than a group of dads playing backyard football acting like their ligaments aren't the equivalent to a dried out rubber band. The matchups? Brother, we've got bottom 5 offenses lighting up top 5 defenses, like the 4th of July out there. We've got elite wide receivers running cardio for 4 straight quarters, while some random wide receiver 4 becomes Megatron for a single afternoon. At this point, lineups aren't strategy. They're scratch-off lottery tickets. Fantasy football in 2025 is chaos. It's madness. It's beautiful. It's stupid. And I will absolutely be here every week trying to understand it. For now, though, let's just look into some of the top injuries that we saw last week in the NFL. And week 13 was no different than every other week of the NFL season. There were some injuries that screwed some fantasy lineups. The first name to talk about is Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver of the Detroit Lions. He suffered an ankle injury, did nothing for your fantasy team in week 13. However, he had an MRI and it showed a low ankle sprain. Hoping he can continue to play through it. There may be some slight limitations, though. How about Marvin Harrison Jr.? He returns and then gets hurt again with a heel injury. He left the game, did not return. He's currently questionable to play in week 14. Parker Washington in Jacksonville. He suffered a hip injury. Also left the game, questionable to play in week 14. If you have Jacoby Myers, this may be the week. Then we had Dylan Sampson. We did not know what to expect from him here this week. Thought there was a chance for a slightly elevated role. He suffered a calf injury. He left the game. also questionable for week 14. How about Aaron Jones suffering a shoulder injury, came off the field visibly angry, throwing helmets, flopping down on the bench, did not look like he was enjoying himself whatsoever. That shoulder injury could keep him out for multiple weeks. And then lastly, I'm not feeling fancy. It's Justin Herbert and his hand. His non-throwing hand was fractured. It's going to require surgery, and who knows how much time he could miss. Now, it's not his throwing hand, and it's not a major injury, so there is a chance that he plays fairly soon. Which is perfect, though, because we got some teams on a bye this week, and man, Week 14 buys have to be the worstest in the NFL. How about the Patriots being on a bye? We will not have Drake May, Travion Henderson, Stephon Diggs, or Hunter Henry. The Giants are on a bye, which means no Jackson Dart, Wan'Dale Robinson, Theo Johnson, maybe if you were using him at tight end. The 49ers are on a bye, and this one makes me want to cry. Not because we're without Brock Purdy, but we will not have Christian McCaffrey in Week 14 of fantasy football. Also, no Juwan Jennings, no George Kittle. The Panthers are also on a bye. Really, the only players we'll be missing there, Rico Dowdle and Teteroa McMillan, which means all these guys will not be available for your fantasy football teams in Week 14. So maybe you have some holes to fill. What can we put into those holes in Week 14? At the quarterback position, there ain't a whole lot out there, and what's out there isn't exactly lowly owned. There's some bad matchups here this week. There's some players who we just do not want to start in fantasy football. Trevor Lawrence is only 48% owned. He may be out there for a few of you. He's going up against Indianapolis, and it may feel gross, but do you realize that Trevor Lawrence is currently a top 12 fantasy quarterback, and he's scored at least 20 fantasy points in 3 of his last 5 games played? He's still less than 50% owned, and now he faces an Indianapolis secondary who may be without Sauce Gardner this week. Tua Tagovailoa could be an option for you this week. He's 20% owned going up against the Jets, and Tua has not been tearing it up here as of late. But like I said, there are minimal options out there on the waiver wire, and this week he gets a matchup going up against the Jets, who he threw for multiple touchdowns against back in Week 4. Honestly, in this game, I'm just hoping for a safe floor game to get you by in a bye week. If we could start Tua and he scores 15 this week, I'm probably pretty happy. And then lastly, it's CJ Stroud of the Houston Texans. He's 40% owned going up against Kansas City. And Stroud struggled at times in his first game back last week, but now he faces Kansas City, a team they will not be able to run against. They're going to have to throw the football if they want any chance of winning this week. The Chiefs do allow right around 18 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And once again, if we could start Stroud and get anywhere near 15 fantasy points this week, it would be great. But honestly, this is not the week where we want to start a guy like Tyler Shuck or Shedeur Sanders. It's really no surprise that at this point of the NFL season, the waiver wire be getting a little bit thin with all the injuries and bye weeks. So let's go ahead and move down to the running back position now. First up, Blake Corum of the Los Angeles Rams. He's 15% owned going up against Arizona. And Corum has only had 2 games all season with more than 10 fantasy points. He's really not a viable starting option in fantasy football unless Kyren Williams is not healthy. But we are starting to see a little bit more Blake Corum more and more each week. He's been utilized in alternating drives. He's been utilized around the goal line as well. But I will go ahead and say this. He should be close to 100% owned at this point of the fantasy football season. And I'm going to tell you why. Kyren Williams is almost 100% owned in fantasy football. So if you own Kyren Williams and you do not have Blake Corum on your bench as we get closer to the fantasy playoffs, you could be setting yourself up for absolute failure. Grab him, stash him, especially if you have Kyren Williams. Then we get Samaje Perine of the Cincinnati Bengals, only 5% owned going up against Buffalo. Everyone on earth was scratching their heads when they saw Samaje Perine have 16 touches in Week 13. Now, a lot of people would see that and be, man, what happened to Chase Brown? Nothing happened to Chase Brown. He still had 22 total touches. It makes absolutely no sense. However, it would not surprise me if Cincinnati runs the ball a lot again this week against Buffalo. Buffalo is a lot easier to run on than throw on, Plus, if you're running the football successfully, you're keeping the football away from Josh Allen and the Bills' offense. Now, after him, we got Keaton Mitchell of the Baltimore Ravens, only 3% owned, going up against Pittsburgh, and he's not getting a whole lot of touches as of right now. But the Baltimore backfield is seeing a lot bigger of a split than a lot of people anticipated. This is not Derrick Henry running away with every single snap. Mitchell and Ali are out there taking away a lot of the Kings' work. And we all know that Mitchell has blazing speed and great playmaking ability. Do not be surprised if we see more of him down the stretch of the 2025 season. Then lastly, Chris Rodriguez of the Washington Commanders, 18% owned, going up against Minnesota. We've talked about him for a couple weeks now because we knew there was a chance of him taking over this backfield. We wanted to get him cheaper a couple weeks ago. Well, now, after Sunday Night Football, it's apparent he's going to be leading this backfield going forward. This is not a great matchup going up against Minnesota, but Seattle did find some success against them on the ground. He could have weekly flex appeal here, could Chris Rodriguez. But after that, we need to go down to the wide receiver position, and the first name up is Jaden Higgins of the Houston Texans. He's 35% owned, going up against Kansas City, and the targets that he has been seeing were not just a Davis Mills thing. He saw 5 targets as well in the return of CJ Stroud. The biggest difference, all 5 of them were catchable. He also has touchdowns in 3 of his last 5, and in order for Houston to beat Kansas City, like we mentioned earlier with CJ Stroud, they're going to have to throw the football. And with so much defensive attention going the way of Nico Collins, Jaden Higgins could once again see decent targets in week 14. Then we got John Mechie of the Jets, 14% owned, going up against Miami. He has back-to-back games of at least 6 targets. He just couldn't get anything down the field in week 13. He's not a bad stash, right? We always say that you can't score points at the wide receiver position without touches, and you can't get touches without targets. He's seen some decent targets the last couple weeks, so he's not a bad stash at this point. But his teammate, also on this list, may be startable sooner. And I'm talking about Adonai Mitchell, 3% owned. And there was only one wide receiver on Sunday to get over 100 yards receiving. Do you know who that receiver was? Maybe kind of obvious. It was Adonai Mitchell, 12 targets, 8 receptions, 102 yards, and a touchdown. Now, we cannot expect that weekly, but it's clear that he is the top target as of right now in the passing game for Tyrod Taylor. The matchup is going to be tough against Miami, but if we have a wide receiver out there getting double-digit targets, he's more than likely going to be at least flex-worthy in PPR leagues. Now, after him, we got Devon Vele of the Saints, only 1% owned, going up against Tampa Bay. We all know that Chris Olave is not 100% healthy, which means Vele was more of a thing in week 13. He was able to bring in all 8 of the targets that he saw and score a touchdown. He's really more of a stash, in my opinion, to see if there's any consistency with what we just saw last week. He could easily be a one-hit wonder in this offense. I'm not throwing a lot of eggs in this basket. But if you have room on the bottom of your bench to stash a guy, somebody with that kind of a ceiling is not a bad stash. Then lastly, another stash at the wide receiver position. We got Isaac Tesla of the Detroit Lions going up against Dallas. He's only 1% owned. And it doesn't sound like the injury is a major one to Amon-Ra St. Brown. And even Tesla himself isn't 100% healthy. But every time they throw the football to this kid, he either scores a touchdown or makes a ridiculous big play. We know with guys like Sam Laporta and Khalif Raymond being done for the year, if there are any more limitations in this passing offense, Isaac Tesla could see a huge bump in production. He's not someone we can start in week 14, but if we can stash him for the fantasy playoffs, I would probably do that. Which means all we have left is the tight end position. A few guys that have been out there for multiple weeks. The first one, Brenton Strange is only 30% owned, and I have no idea how or why. He is going up against Indianapolis this week, and over his last 2 games, he's had at least 90 yards receiving or a touchdown in each game. He's averaging a whopping 16.5 yards per reception, and he's one of the top red zone targets for Trevor Lawrence. If you need a tight end, he may be out there for you. How about Isaiah Likely in Baltimore? And this one makes me rage on the inside a little bit, just a little behind the scenes. When Isaiah Likely dropped that ball going into the end zone, he was one of the legs on my touchdown ticket last week. Had he not dropped it on like the 1-inch line, or at least lost control of it, I would have won $1,200. But dude couldn't hold on, and I won nothing. But anyway, Back to fantasy football. Like I said, he would have been a top 3 tight end on the week had he not dropped that ball and fumbled it out of the back of the end zone. He led the team in receiving in week 13, and it is apparent as of right now, he may be the top target for Lamar Jackson down the field. And then lastly, A.J. Barner, the Seattle Seahawks, 14% owned going up against Atlanta. He outproduced JSN in week 13. Now, I know that's not saying a whole lot because JSN didn't do jack crap in week 13, but Barner has been fairly inconsistent here as of late, and this is a tough matchup going up against Atlanta. But of all the available tight ends on waivers right now, there may not be one out there with a higher touchdown upside this week than A.J. Barner. So now that we know who's out there, let's rank these guys, and this is the order in which I would pick them up off the waiver wire. Now, obviously, I do not value quarterbacks and tight ends that low. However, a lot of people may not need a quarterback or a tight end. If you do, they are ranked by position at the bottom of this list. I just keep the running backs and wide receivers together at the top. And at the top, I got Chris Rodriguez because as of right now, it seems like he may have the most long-standing value. I would not be surprised if he's the leader in this backfield remainder of the season. Then we get down to Jaden Higgins. If he's seeing 5, 6, 7, 8 targets a week, he becomes a weekly flex option. Alongside Adonai Mitchell. Why is he not second? Because he's a Jet. And as good as he looked last week, I'm sick of being disappointed by Jets players. Then we get Samaje Perine, Keaton Mitchell, John Mechie, Blake Corum, Isaac Tesla, and Devon Vele. All of those guys really just bench stashes at best. At the quarterback position, if I needed one this week, I'm going with Trevor Lawrence, Tua, and then CJ Stroud. If I need a tight end, I'm going Strange, Likely, and then Barner. Now, just because I'm picking them up, does that mean that I want to start them or are we just stashing? I would go ahead and start Chris Rodriguez or Jaden Higgins if you needed one of those options here in week 14. Everyone else, I would prefer to stash. Now, if you are in absolute desperation mode, there can be a case made for Adonai Mitchell and Samaje Perine this week. But outside of that, everyone is a stash for me with the exception of the quarterbacks and tight ends. If we're recommending them in a waiver wire show, it's because they're a streaming option that can be started. But how much do we really want to pay on these guys? Because none of these guys are really like league winner type players. At the top of the list with Chris Rodriguez and Jaden Higgins, because they have rest of season value, I'll go up to 25, maybe even 30% of the remaining FAAB budget, but Adonai Mitchell, Samaje Perine, Keaton Mitchell, John Mechie, Blake Corum, maybe up to 15% only because they're a stash at best. Blake Corum, maybe a little bit higher if you are a Kyron Williams owner. Then we get down to Isaac Tesla, Devon Vele, and all the quarterbacks and tight ends. I'm really looking at like up to 10%. And really, I say that because you either have 1 week's worth of value with your quarterback or tight end if you're streaming, and the other guys like Vele and Tesla, they're just bottom of the bench stashes. There's no reason to go out there and blow a ton of FAAB on a guy that you may never use. But maybe you find yourself needing a defense this week as well, and if that's the case, buckle up because you're going to have to go with a team that maybe you had not expected ever picking up in fantasy football, like a team maybe like the Miami defense going up against the Jets. Now, it doesn't sound appealing, but do you realize that the Miami Dolphins defense has scored at least 9 fantasy points in 3 straight ball games and have shut down some pretty good offenses over the last couple of weeks? How about the Titans defense? I know it's disgusting, but they're going up against Cleveland, and this has everything to do with a matchup against a low-scoring Cleveland offense. And then lastly, the Washington Commanders going up against Minnesota. We do not know who the quarterback is going to be just yet in Minnesota, but if it's Max Brosmer, the Washington Commanders DST may be an absolute smash start this week. I didn't think we could get worse than JJ McCarthy, and somehow we got progressively worse with Max Brosmer. I don't know who tweeted it, but I saw something on Twitter or X or whatever the hell you call it. They would have had a higher quarterback rating in Minnesota had he just hiked it and spiked it every single play. It is bad in Minnesota, and for that reason, it makes the Washington Commanders defense an option for us in week 14. All right, so there you have your week 14 waiver wire show. I know we are beat up. We are limping to the finish line in the 2025 fantasy football season, but we don't give up around here. We find a way to either make it to the fantasy playoffs or ruin someone else's chances along the way. But like I have said all season long, and I will say one more time, there will be millions of fantasy football teams this season that make the playoffs with a 500 or below record. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of those teams that limped into the playoffs didn't walk away with a fantasy championship in 2025.